The courtroom was still heavy with the smell of perfume and nervous sweat when she lifted her chin and strode toward the exit. Chairs squeaked as people stood. Papers rustled. Even the judge was still gathering his things. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed every decision had fallen in her favor. Custody, the house, the financial demands she insisted on, all stamped with the approval she fought for. She did not slow down or glance in my direction. Her walk felt like a silent announcement that she had ended a chapter and written the conclusion herself. I remained seated longer than necessary, not because I was defeated, but because the silence after a storm often tells a different story. I watched her disappear through the doors, surrounded by her lawyer and a few friends who praised her resilience. Their voices floated back into the room with a tone that suggested they were celebrating a victory party before the doors had even closed behind them. I stood eventually and folded the documents the judge had handed me. They felt heavier than the paper they were printed on, as if the weight of the decision was settling into my palms. When I stepped outside, the cold air wrapped around me like a reminder that reality rarely follows courtroom scripts. I drove home slowly with my daughter in the back seat. She stared out the window, quiet in a way that did not belong to a child. Her small fingers picked at the corner of her jacket while she tried to understand why adults rearranged her life without asking what she felt. I spoke gently when we arrived, suggesting she rest, but she insisted she was fine. Children often pretend to be strong when their world shifts too quickly. Later that evening, she joined me on the couch with her tablet tucked under her arm. Her hair was tangled from the long day, and her eyes looked tired yet curious. She tapped the screen to wake it up, expecting to watch the cartoon she had paused that morning. Instead, an unfamiliar thumbnail appeared. She hesitated for a moment, then pressed play. Within seconds, her posture changed. Her back straightened. Her little hand covered her mouth. The room fell unnaturally still. She did not speak. She simply turned the screen toward me with both hands, as if passing me something fragile. The brightness of the tablet lit her face and revealed a look no parent ever wants to see on their child. Shock mixed with something she did not yet understand. The video was short, but the meaning was devastating. My wife appeared in a room I did not recognize, sitting close to a man she once described as a colleague. Their voices were soft. Their closeness was unmistakable. The timestamp showed the recording had been made during our marriage, not after the separation she was so proud to emphasize in court. My daughter watched my expression carefully. I did not react with anger or tears. A 40-year-old audience understands that some truths land with a quiet force that robs you of immediate emotion. I closed the tablet gently and placed it on the table. My daughter leaned against me, seeking reassurance I could not yet give with words. I held her until her heartbeat slowed. What her tablet revealed was not just betrayal. It was a missing piece the judge had not seen. It was the moment I understood that the verdict she celebrated was built on an illusion. And soon, the court would discover that the wrong person had walked out of that room wearing the crown of victory. The tablet lit up again when my daughter shifted it on her lap, as if the device itself insisted on revealing what had remained hidden. The video resumed from the exact second it had last paused. A dim room appeared on the screen, illuminated by a bedside lamp placed too far from the center to brighten anything fully. The shadows carried a familiarity I could not place. Then her voice filled the room. The laugh that once belonged to our early years. The same laugh that had slowly disappeared from our home long before we ever spoke of separation. My daughter leaned closer, her brows pinched in confusion. A man's voice overlapped hers in the recording. It was not the tone of a casual conversation between colleagues. It carried comfort, ease, and the smug security of someone who believed secrecy guaranteed innocence. Their faces shifted into view. They were seated far too close. Their expressions revealed a connection I had tried for years to pretend was only in my imagination. The man brushed a strand of her hair away, and she smiled in a way she had not smiled at me in years. My daughter's voice broke the silence with a small question. She asked why her mother was with that man. The softness in her tone felt heavier than any accusation an adult could deliver. I did not answer. I could not risk placing adult pain onto a child who still believed trust was something permanent. Instead, I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and pulled her closer. Her breathing changed, becoming shallow and uncertain as she tried to interpret what she was seeing. The video continued, revealing conversations that had no place in our home and no reason to be captured on a child's device. They spoke freely, unaware the tablet had recorded everything when it was left on the bed. My wife mentioned a work trip that, according to her, had been exhausting. In the recording, she described it as the most peaceful weekend she had enjoyed in a long time. The man laughed and told her she deserved happiness. I listened without reacting, aware that every visible expression on my face mattered deeply to the child sitting beside me. I reached for the tablet slowly and pressed pause. The silence that followed stretched across the room like a truth that refused to hide again. My daughter kept her gaze on the screen, waiting for me to speak. Adults who have lived through disappointment understand that some answers must be measured carefully. I lifted her onto my lap and held her as she tried to process something she never should have witnessed. Her head rested against my chest, and I felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, trusting and fragile at the same time. She did not cry. She simply stayed close, absorbing the calm I tried to project. When children sense that adults are shaken, they lose the ground beneath their feet. I knew I had to stay still for her, even while my own world shifted beneath the weight of what I had just seen. Over the next few minutes, her body relaxed, and she began to drift into sleep, her small fingers still clutching a corner of my shirt. I placed the tablet on the table without replaying anything. The evidence existed. That was enough. The purpose of this moment was not justice or strategy. It was the simple responsibility of protecting a child from drowning in an ocean she did not create. I carried her to her room once she fell asleep, tucked the blanket around her shoulders, and watched her breathe peacefully. What the video revealed would alter the direction of the case. But that night, none of that mattered. My only goal was keeping her heart steady until morning. The night felt heavier than usual as I placed my sleeping daughter in her room and stepped back into the hallway. The house was silent, yet my thoughts moved with a sharp clarity that left no room for hesitation. I picked up the tablet again, stared at its frozen image, and felt an unmistakable shift inside me. This was not about revenge. It was not about scoring points in a broken marriage. This was about a child who deserved honesty and a future free from manipulation. With that in mind, I grabbed my keys and headed to the car. The drive to my lawyer's home was long enough for doubts to appear, but short enough that they never had time to grow roots. Streetlights flashed across the windshield as I replayed the video in my mind. Not the betrayal, not the dialogue, the expression on my daughter's face when she looked at me for answers. That look guided every decision I made that night. When I reached the neighborhood where my lawyer lived, most houses were already dark. His porch light was still on, a sign that he was awake and probably reviewing file for the following day. I knocked with a firmness that signaled urgency. He opened the door, wearing a look halfway between concern and curiosity. Without speaking, I handed him the tablet. He motioned for me to come inside, and we settled in his study where case files and thick law books covered the shelves. The room smelled of paper and coffee, a combination that always seemed to accompany difficult conversations. He pressed play. The dimly lit recording filled the room with a tension that neither of us attempted to break. As the video unfolded, I watched his eyes narrow and his hand move slowly to adjust his glasses. His posture changed from relaxed to intent, the way a man sits when he recognizes the gravity of what he is seeing. When the recording ended, he remained still for a moment, as if measuring the implications. He finally leaned back and said the words that confirmed my instinct. He told me the situation had moved into a different category. Evidence of deception always redefines the path of a case, especially when a child is caught in the impact. I explained quietly how the video had appeared, how my daughter had discovered it, and how long I believed the hidden relationship had been going on. He listened without interrupting, taking brief notes that would later serve a much larger purpose. He closed the tablet gently and placed it between us like an object of undeniable truth. He reminded me that the legal process values clarity over emotion, and that this recording provided clarity the court had lacked. He rose from his chair and pulled a file from a drawer containing templates for emergency motions. The seriousness of his movements carried more weight than his words. He asked me to recount the timeline with precision and requested a written statement to accompany the evidence. While he began typing the motion, he outlined the next steps with calm authority. There would be a request for immediate review of custody arrangements. There would be an argument that the previous ruling had been based on incomplete information. Most importantly, there would be a shift in how the court viewed parental reliability. I sat quietly as he worked, fully aware that none of this guaranteed victory. A 40-year-old audience understands that legal battles rarely unfold with cinematic simplicity. But this evidence changed the foundation of the case. It offered the court a reason to reconsider decisions made earlier that day. When he finished drafting the motion, he printed it and placed it in front of me for review. The urgency was unmistakable. The next hearing would no longer revolve around emotional narratives or polished testimonies. It would revolve around verifiable truth. When I left his house, the night air felt different. Not lighter, not victorious, simply aligned with a purpose I could no longer ignore. The fight ahead was not about reclaiming pride. It was about protecting the only person who had never lied in the entire process. The path forward was clear. The court would soon understand that the story presented earlier had been missing its most important piece. The next morning felt strangely calm, as if the house itself sensed that something irreversible had begun. I arrived at the courthouse early, carrying the sealed envelope my lawyer had prepared. The corridors smelled of polished wood and old paper, a scent that always reminded me that justice moves slowly but steadily. My lawyer walked beside me with measured steps, confident but cautious. He explained that the judge had agreed to review the evidence privately before opening the session. That alone told me the atmosphere would not resemble the previous hearing. We were invited into chambers before the courtroom opened. The judge sat behind his desk, wearing the same formal robe as yesterday, yet his presence felt different. He motioned for us to sit and opened the envelope without ceremony. The tablet lay on the table between us like an object capable of rewriting the entire narrative. He pressed play with a deliberate hand, giving the impression that he had already anticipated the seriousness of what he was about to witness. The room darkened as the video began. The dim lighting of that unfamiliar bedroom glowed across the judge's face. My wife's voice floated through the speakers with a tone that could not be misinterpreted. She laughed softly, leaning toward the man whose presence she had never acknowledged publicly. They spoke with an ease that revealed history, not a recent connection formed after a separation. The judge watched without blinking. When the video ended, he tapped the screen once, as if confirming that he had not missed anything. He did not express shock. Experienced judges rarely show the emotions that cross their minds. But he lifted his head slowly and looked at me in a way he had not looked at me during the previous hearing. It was not sympathy. It was not pity. It was recognition. He seemed to understand that he had been handed a version of the truth that had been carefully curated to paint me as the less stable parent. Now, he held a piece of information that altered the foundation of every argument presented the day before. My wife entered chambers moments later with her lawyer. Her steps were hesitant. The confidence she wore like perfume yesterday had vanished. When she saw the tablet on the desk, her expression tightened. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but the panic had already surfaced in her eyes. Makeup could not hide the strain. Silence filled the room. The judge gestured toward the chair opposite him, and she sat with stiff shoulders, unable to mask the tension in her posture. He asked her to confirm whether the video was authentic. She attempted to speak, but her voice cracked. Her lawyer intervened, claiming the recording might have been taken after our separation. The judge raised a single finger, signaling that he wanted her answer, not speculation. She opened her mouth again, then closed it. Her silence spoke louder than any denial. For a long moment, the judge leaned back and studied her. The facade of a devoted mother that she had displayed in the previous hearing suddenly looked fragile, like a portrait painted on thin glass. The judge made a brief, note in his file. The sound of his pen scratched through the stillness and felt like a verdict in itself. My lawyer and I exchanged a glance. There was no triumph. There was only confirmation that the legal ground beneath our feet had shifted. The judge announced that the issues raised by the video required immediate attention. He instructed us to return to the courtroom and prepare for revised proceedings. When we stepped out of chambers, the hallway felt different. The tension that had once wrapped around every corner had dissolved. For the first time in months, the courthouse was not a battlefield. It was quiet, a deep, undeniable quiet that revealed a truth no one could argue against. Something had changed, and everyone felt it. The courtroom filled slowly after the meeting in chambers, but the energy had shifted in a way everyone could sense. Lawyers whispered to their clients with new caution. Clerks avoided eye contact as they arranged documents on the judge's bench. Even the sunlight filtering through the tall windows seemed quieter, as if aware that the morning was no longer unfolding according to the script my wife had confidently written for herself. She walked in with her lawyer close behind, but her steps lacked the certainty she had flaunted the day before. She sat down without looking in my direction, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her lawyer leaned toward her with a hurried whisper, but her eyes remained fixed on the tablet the judge had placed on the evidence table. It sat there like a mirror she did not want to face, reflecting everything she had insisted the court believe. When the judge returned, he took his seat with a calm expression that concealed the weight of what he had already seen. He opened the session and asked my wife to stand. She rose slowly, her composure held together by habit rather than conviction. Her lawyer joined her and attempted to begin with a rehearsed explanation. He said the recording lacked context. He said couples often drift apart long before formal separation. He said the date might not reflect when the events actually occurred. The judge raised his hand, silencing him with a single gesture. He pointed to the screen showing the paused video. Then he asked my wife to confirm whether the room shown in the recording belonged to the home she had rented during the final year of our marriage. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. The judge asked her to state when she had moved into that location. She gave a date, one that matched the lease we had all seen during the last hearing. Next, he addressed the timestamp displayed on the recording. It was clear, precise, and matched a period when she claimed to be traveling alone for work. Her lawyer attempted to intervene again, suggesting technical errors, but the judge requested that he sit down. The courtroom fell silent. The judge asked my wife the simplest question of all. He asked her whether the recording was fabricated. She shook her head. He asked her whether the man in the video was a colleague. She answered yes, but her voice trembled. Then came the sentence that dissolved whatever remained of her credibility. The judge replayed the moment where she laughed softly and said that her husband would never find out because he never checked the tablet. The room listened to her voice echo through the speakers. There was no mistaking the meaning. There was no possibility of misinterpretation. Her own words created the timeline she was trying so hard to disown. My wife's lawyer rose again, now less confident, and attempted to argue that emotions should not dictate the interpretation of evidence. But the judge interrupted him with another question. He asked her why the child's tablet had been present in that bedroom. She could not explain. He asked whether she had considered the risk of exposing a child's property to intimate situations. She had no answer for that either. Each inquiry dismantled another layer of the story she had built. For the first time since the process began, the judge's attention turned fully toward her, not as a mother defending her rights, but as a witness struggling to maintain the truthfulness expected in his courtroom. Her shoulders slumped. Her voice became quiet. She glanced at her lawyer frequently, as if seeking instructions on how to respond. Yet even he seemed unable to rescue her from the unraveling narrative. The judge finally leaned back and closed the file. The message was clear. The previous testimony had been incomplete. The credibility she relied on had dissolved. What remained was a series of contradictions she could no longer escape. The judge's ruling was brief and delivered without emotion, yet everyone in the courtroom understood its impact. He announced a temporary shift to shared custody until the investigation reached its conclusion. It was not a triumph. It was not a declaration of fault. It was simply an acknowledgement that the earlier decision had been made with incomplete information. He instructed both sides to cooperate fully and reminded us that the priority was the well-being of a 7-year-old child who had been placed at the center of a conflict she never asked for. My wife's lawyer attempted to protest, insisting that stability favored maintaining the earlier arrangement. The judge responded by reminding him that stability cannot be built on deception. He made it clear that the investigation would be thorough. The courtroom remained still as he outlined the guidelines for exchanges, school communication, and parental responsibilities. His words carried the firm tone of someone who had seen families crumble when truth arrived too late. When the session ended, the hallway outside the courtroom felt different than it had only a day earlier. The hostility that once filled the air seemed to dissolve. My wife walked ahead of her lawyer with a stiff posture, as if holding herself together through sheer will. She avoided looking in my direction, not out of anger, but because she no longer controlled the narrative she had spent months constructing. I stepped out into the fresh air with a strange sense of clarity. Nothing was solved, yet something fundamental had shifted. The first pickup under the new arrangement took place that afternoon. When my daughter saw me waiting outside the school, her face brightened in a way I had not seen since before the separation. She ran toward me with a kind of relief that only a child's heart can express. There was no tension in her steps, no glance over her shoulder. She simply leaped in my arms and held on tightly, her head pressed against my chest. I felt her breathing settle, as if she finally understood that the distance created between us was no longer permanent. We walked to the car slowly. She reached for my hand without hesitation. The change in her was immediate and unmistakable. The silence that had once accompanied our drives was gone. She spoke freely about her day, her friends, her drawings. She did not whisper. She did not speak cautiously. She spoke like a child who felt safe. Only parents who have lived through custody disagreements understand how deeply a child absorbs tension even when you try to hide it. When we arrived home, she placed her backpack on the floor and wandered around the living room, as if rediscovering familiar spaces. She took out her colored pencils and began sketching at the dining table. Her drawings had been dark and minimal in recent weeks. That afternoon, she filled the page with bright shapes and wide smiles. I stood at the counter pouring juice for her, observing quietly. It became clear that the change in the court order had done more than redistribute time. It had lifted an invisible weight from her shoulders. Later, she asked if she could stay up a little longer because she wanted to finish her drawing. I agreed, watching her concentrate with renewed ease. When bedtime arrived, she hugged me longer than usual. It was the kind of embrace that carries unspoken gratitude. She did not know the legal details. She did not understand investigations or motions, but she sensed honesty returning to the space around her. Children always know when adults lie. They simply lack the vocabulary to name the discomfort. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, but no longer felt heavy. The journey ahead was still uncertain, yet the first real step had been taken. The custody conversation had finally shifted toward truth, not accusation. For the first time in months, I felt my daughter's world expanding instead of shrinking. And in that moment, breath was enough. News travels quickly in families, even when no one admits to sharing it. By the next afternoon, the ripple of truth had already reached the people who once championed my wife's version of events without hesitation. I was preparing dinner for my daughter when my phone rang. The screen displayed a name I had not seen since before the separation. Her father. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Curiosity won. I answered with a neutral tone, ready for anything except what I actually heard. He began with a slow breath, the kind someone takes when searching for the right words. He apologized, not defensively, not rhetorically. He spoke with a sincerity that I had not expected from a man who had stood firmly on his daughter's side during every disagreement. He explained that he had believed her entirely. He said she insisted that the marriage collapsed because I lacked dedication and emotional maturity. He admitted that they had encouraged her to fight for full custody, assuming it was the safest option for their granddaughter. When he learned about the recording, the lies she had told them began to unravel just as they had in court. His voice grew quieter as he acknowledged the pain such dishonesty must have caused. Her mother joined the call briefly. She did not cry, but her voice carried the fragile tone of someone confronting a truth she wished she had known earlier. She expressed regret for distancing themselves from me and for allowing anger to cloud their judgment. She said she hoped the new custody arrangement would bring stability to their granddaughter. There was no attempt to excuse their daughter's actions, only an acceptance that they had defended a version of events that never existed. The call ended with a simple request. They wanted to remain involved in their granddaughter's life and hoped I would not shut them out because of their earlier assumptions. I promised them that whatever decisions were made would prioritize the child's well-being. Not everyone responded with humility. Her sister remained silent. This silence was not the respectful kind her parents showed. This silence was avoidance. Direct avoidance. She passed me at school pickup without meeting my eyes. She shifted conversations whenever someone mentioned the hearing. She acted as if acknowledging me would force her to confront the loud and public accusations she had hurled throughout the divorce. She had once told anyone who would listen that I was irresponsible and manipulative. Now every one of those claims reverberated back at her with a sting she was not prepared to face. Her reaction was not surprising. Some people can handle the truth once it appears. Others crumble under the weight of their own misplaced confidence. She was the latter. She avoided social gatherings where she might be asked what had happened. She ignored messages from friends seeking clarification about the sudden shift in custody. She stopped defending her sister because the evidence made silence the only option left. Shame moved faster than anger, and it settled heavily around her. Rumors began circulating quietly in the extended family. Not malicious rumors. Simply the type of whispered conversations families have when reality confronts the narrative they were fed. Aunts who had believed my wife without question now asked gentle but revealing inquiries. Uncles who had once looked at me with suspicion now offered nods of understanding. No one openly discussed the recording, yet its existence shaped the tone of every interaction. Through all of this, I maintained a calm distance. I did not need their validation. I did not seek their apologies, but I recognized the value of a family acknowledging the truth when it finally appeared. My focus remained on my daughter, whose life was slowly regaining balance. The reactions of adults, whether apologetic or embarrassed, mattered far less than the stability she was beginning to feel again. The shift in perception among my wife's family marked a turning point, not because it vindicated me, but because it revealed something deeper. When lies collapse, they do not fall quietly. They pull down everything built upon them. And my wife, who once walked into the courtroom with full confidence, now stood alone in the silence created by her own deception. The house was unusually quiet that evening. Dinner dishes were washed and placed neatly on a rack, and my daughter had wandered into her room with a handful of colored pencils. I stood in the hallway, finishing a few emails when I heard the gentle scratch of her drawings against paper. It was a normal sound, familiar and comforting, the kind that reassures a parent that life is settling into something steady again. I peeked into her doorway and saw her sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers filled with bright shapes and smiling faces. For the first time in a long while, she seemed at peace. I was about to step away when she paused mid-stroke. She held the pencil above the paper without moving, as if something had frozen her thoughts. I watched her shoulders lift with a small breath. She turned her head slowly toward me. Her expression did not show fear. It showed a seriousness far beyond her 7 years. Children sense weight before they understand its name. She set the pencil down and called to me in a soft voice. I walked into the room and sat beside her. She looked at the drawing for a moment, pressing her lips together as though deciding whether her words would disrupt something important. Then she looked up at me with an honesty that only a child can deliver. She told me that her mother had asked her not to show the videos. She said that her mother warned her to delete them and to keep them secret. She repeated the last instructions slowly, as if replaying a moment that had confused her even then. The room felt colder, as if someone had opened a window to winter air. I did not react visibly. Adults who have lived through betrayal understand that there are moments when silence must protect a child from the full truth. I placed my hand gently on her back and asked nothing more. I did not want her to feel interrogated. I did not want her to believe she had done anything wrong. Instead, I thanked her for sharing something that clearly weighed on her heart. She leaned into me immediately, seeking reassurance. I wrapped my arms around her and held her until her breathing slowed. Inside, another emotion stirred. Not anger, something deeper and sharper. Manipulating a spouse is painful. Manipulating a child is unforgivable. Asking a child to carry a secret that shields an adult from accountability crosses a line no parent should ever approach. The recording itself revealed deceit. Her instruction to a 7-year-old revealed character. It showed that she had been willing to involve our daughter in a conflict she did not understand. No court could ignore that. No judge could overlook the seriousness of those words. My daughter eventually picked up her pencil again and continued drawing as if the confession had freed her from a burden she was too young to carry. Her lines became smoother, her colors brighter. Children release tension quickly when given a safe space. I remained seated beside her, watching the ease return to her small features. I realized then that she had been waiting for the right moment to speak. She had chosen this night because she felt secure, because she trusted that honesty was safe in this home. Later, after she fell asleep, I stood at her doorway for a long time. The quiet of the house felt different than before. It felt like the truth had settled firmly into place. The legal process would continue. Investigators would review everything. Judges would make decisions. But the most important testimony had already been given. It came from a 7-year-old girl sitting on her bedroom floor with a colored pencil in her hand. Her words changed the direction of the case. Her courage changed everything. The official call came 2 days after my daughter spoke the truth in her bedroom. A representative from Child Services informed me that an interview was scheduled. The tone was calm and reassuring, yet it carried the unmistakable seriousness of a process that shifts the direction of a case. I prepared my daughter gently, not with instructions or suggestions, but with the simple reassurance that she only needed to speak honestly. She nodded with the quiet confidence that children display when they trust the adult beside them. The interview took place in a neutral office decorated with soft colors and shelves of toys intended to make the environment less intimidating. My daughter sat at a small table across from the caseworker, a woman with a gentle smile and observant eyes. I waited in the adjoining room while they spoke. Even from a distance, I could sense my daughter's composure. She did not appear frightened or pressured. She spoke with the same sincerity she had shown when she told me the truth at home. Later, the caseworker met with me privately. She explained that my daughter had expressed confusion about being asked to hide things. She described how unsettling it had been to receive instructions that did not feel right, even if she did not fully understand why. She had not shown anger or fear, only the honest uncertainty of a child caught between loyalty and discomfort. The caseworker took careful notes and thanked me for supporting my daughter without influencing her. Her expression carried the professional neutrality of someone who has seen many complicated family dynamics. Yet there was a softness in her eyes that suggested she understood the unspoken pain behind every answer my daughter had given. News of the interview reached my wife quickly. Her lawyer contacted mine within hours, proposing a meeting to discuss a possible settlement. The shift in tone was striking. Just a week earlier, her legal team had insisted on aggressive demands, convinced they held the moral high ground. Now their approach had softened, marked by a sudden eagerness to resolve matters privately. My lawyer recognized the pattern immediately. When evidence becomes difficult to challenge, negotiation often becomes the chosen path for those who fear public scrutiny. During the meeting that followed, her lawyer spoke with a controlled urgency. He suggested revisiting custody terms, property division, and financial responsibilities. He emphasized the importance of reducing conflict and avoiding further emotional distress for all parties. My wife sat beside him, silent for most of the discussion. Her confident posture was gone. She appeared smaller, as if the weight of the collapsing narrative had settled onto her shoulders. She stared at the table while her lawyer tried to rebuild a sense of order around her. I listened without interrupting. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Revenge had never been my goal. The truth had simply taken its course. The caseworker's interview had uncovered a deeper issue than betrayal. It revealed a breach of parental judgment. It showed that my daughter had been placed in a position she should never have carried. Her confusion had spoken louder than any accusation I could have made. When I left the meeting, my lawyer walked beside me with a measured expression. He explained that seeking a rushed settlement might be my wife's attempt to regain control before the investigation advanced further. He reminded me that control is not restored through negotiation. It is regained through accountability and genuine change. Neither had been demonstrated yet. Outside the building, the air felt cooler than expected. I realized then that the consequences unfolding around my wife were not punishments. They were simply the natural results of choices she had made long before the courtroom ever opened its doors. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time I understood something clearly. The truth had begun shaping the outcome without my interference. The consequences had arrived, not through vengeance, but through the quiet and undeniable weight of honesty. The day of the final hearing began with a quiet that felt almost unnatural. I arrived at the courthouse early, walking through a lobby filled with people whose lives were also waiting to be rearranged by a few lines of legal text. My lawyer met me near the elevators. He carried no new documents and spoke in a calm tone that suggested everything had already been said. The investigation was complete. The statements had been reviewed. The report from Child Services had been added to the file. All that remained was the judge's decision. The courtroom was fuller than usual. Reporters were not allowed, but curiosity has its own way of filling empty chairs. My wife entered moments later. Her shoulders drooped slightly. She no longer wore the confident expression she had flaunted at the beginning of the process. She sat beside her lawyer, who looked as though he had rehearsed apologies he hoped he would not need to deliver. No one spoke. The cold silence had replaced the tension that once hung between us. When the judge finally entered, the room straightened. He carried a thick file under his arm and settled into his chair with the practiced calm of someone who understands the weight of his responsibility. He opened the folder and reviewed a few notes before lifting his eyes. He asked my wife to stand. She rose slowly, gripping the edge of the table for balance. Her lawyer remained seated, his gaze fixed on the file in front of him. The judge began speaking without raising his voice. He did not lean forward or gesture dramatically. He simply read the facts. He explained that the court had been misled by statements presented as truth. He noted that evidence had surfaced showing decisions no parent should involve a child in. He referenced the video and the request made to our daughter to hide and delete information. His tone remained steady, but each sentence landed with the heaviness of a verdict already formed. He continued by addressing the impact of these actions. He stated that custody should never be used as a tool for retaliation, and yet the evidence suggested that resentment had shaped many of the choices presented to the court. He explained that placing a child at the center of a deception undermines the trust required for healthy parenting. He acknowledged that marriages fail, but insisted that parental responsibility remains. My wife looked down, her hands trembling. Not a single word came from her lips. My lawyer remained silent beside me, allowing the judge's reasoning to unfold without interruption. The courtroom absorbed every detail. Even the clerks stopped writing for a moment. The judge turned a page and delivered his conclusion with an almost gentle tone. He awarded primary custody to me. He granted my wife supervised visits until she demonstrated emotional stability and a willingness to rebuild trust. He explained that this was not a punishment. It was a protective measure based on observable behavior. My wife did not gasp or cry. Her collapse did not come with sound. It came in the slow way her shoulders sank and her jaw tightened. The realization did not strike like lightning. It settled like dust over her expression, thick and undeniable. Her world did not fall apart in a dramatic burst. It folded inward quietly, the way a structure built on hidden fractures finally gives in to its own weight. When the judge dismissed the room, no one moved immediately. The The echoes of his decision lingered in the air. I stood slowly, feeling a sense of steadiness rather than triumph. My lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder briefly, offering silent acknowledgement. As I walked out of the courtroom, I understood that nothing about this victory was loud. It was simply the natural consequence of truth finally being allowed to stand without interference. Time has a way of softening the edges of even the harshest months. After the final hearing, life did not transform instantly. It shifted gradually, the way dawn replaces night, not with a single burst of light, but with a slow, steady unveiling. My daughter adapted first. Children often do. Her sleep became deeper. The small frowns she once carried into bedtime faded. She no longer asked questions that held fear beneath the words. Instead, she spoke about school, friendships, and new games she invented. Her drawings changed most noticeably. The page that once showed two homes separated by a jagged line now displayed trees, animals, and figures holding hands without distance between them. Healing often begins in crayons before it appears in speech. I rebuilt our routines with care. We cooked simple meals together. We started a tradition of reading every night before bed. Some evenings, she chose fairy tales. Other nights, she picked books with facts about the planets or oceans. Her curiosity returned with a force that reassured me she was reclaiming her childhood piece by piece. I realized that stability is not created by court orders. It is created by daily gestures repeated with constancy until they become the reassuring rhythm of a new life. Months passed before my former wife reached out. The first time she called, her voice carried hesitation, as though she had rehearsed the apology but lost her courage midway. She said she was trying to understand everything that had happened. She said she never meant for things to spiral the way they did. I listened quietly. She did not ask about our daughter at first. She asked about forgiveness. Not openly, but through the gentle uncertainty woven into her words. I did not respond with anger. Hate requires energy I no longer choose to give. Life after truth feels lighter when you stop carrying emotions that lead nowhere. But I also refuse to distort the past to comfort her. The events that led us here were not misunderstandings. They were decisions. And decisions have consequences that do not vanish because time passes or remorse appears. I reminded her gently that accountability is part of healing. She listened, then ended the call with a subdued thank you, as if grateful for honesty even when it offered no absolution. She called again weeks later. This time she asked about her daughter. She wanted to know whether she seemed happy, whether she talked about their time together. I told her the truth. Our daughter enjoyed the supervised visits. She asked questions afterward, not with fear, but with curiosity. She was trying to understand her mother in the same way she was trying to understand the world. My former wife grew emotional. She said she was trying to rebuild herself and hoped one day she could earn more time with her child. I told her growth is always possible, but cannot be rushed or disguised. She accepted the words quietly. As seasons changed, I realized I no longer replayed the betrayal in my mind. The video that had once felt like a wound became simply a turning point in our story. Not the end, not the beginning, just the moment clarity arrived. I often thought about how everything shifted because a child pressed play on a forgotten tablet. The truth revealed itself without force. It stepped into the light because it had been waiting for the right opening. Now, when I sit on the couch and watch my daughter create new drawings, I understand something with certainty. The universe does not always shout when it delivers justice. Sometimes it speaks through small hands, quiet rooms, and moments that seem insignificant until they change everything. The lie had lived long enough. The truth had finally taken its place. And from that truth, we build a life steady enough for both of us to breathe again.